Hey guys, Mitch Byrom here. This module is going to be a technical one talking about the industry standards for equipment setup. Okay, when I say industry standards, what I mean is, whoa, just appeared right here, right? So the IICRC S500 standard and reference guide. What does that really mean? A standard and a reference guide. Okay, what that means is, if you turn it this way, you see some pages are blue and some pages are white. Okay, the blue pages are your standard. Okay, and your standards on page 56 here, it says you need one air mover for every 50 to 70 square foot of the floor that's wet. Okay, that's your standard for equipment setup for air movers. It says you need one for every 100 to 150 square foot of the walls and ceilings that are wet over 2 foot up. And it says you need one air mover for every offset or inset in the room. Now we'll go over in more detail, but this is pretty detailed. Okay, that's your standard for air mover setup. Okay, for dehumidifiers, it basically says you should use a formula, and you can go to chapter 13. When we flip over to chapter 13, we find those in some white pages. That means it's not in our standard, it's in our reference guide. And in the reference guide, it gives us 2 different options, right? You can divide the cubic foot by 100, or divide the cubic foot by 50, or divide the cubic foot by 40 or by 30, depending on what percent of the room's wet. And that'll tell you how many pints of water to install on the job. And that's a minimum to start the job. There's also another formula that if you use it, you take that same formula and you multiply it by a little bit more equipment if it's humid outside, a little bit more equipment if the materials are harder to dry, a little bit more equipment if the building leaks, like an older building would leak more air, a little bit more equipment if the floor plan is really dense. Think of a warehouse versus an office complex, okay? So industry standards means the IICRC, the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, all right? We'll put that out of the way, okay? That is a industry consensus document. What that means is it's not a law. It's not a regulatory issue, okay? It's not something the insurance carriers came up with. It was a group of contractors came together, right? You got some manufacturers like Dry-Ease and Phoenix and ProChem, right? You got some consultants in the industry. You've got some trainers in the industry. You've got some attorneys from the industry, mostly from the vendor side, the contractor side, or the legal side. Not a lot of involvement from the insurance side for obvious reasons, right? So this document is your standard for how you set up equipment. Now, when we talk industry standards, I want to be very specific. This doesn't mean it's a company standard. This doesn't mean it's a federal standard or a state standard or an insurance standard. It's an industry standard. That means it's kind of like Congress. We all voted on it and agreed. Some things we disagreed with. So we didn't put it in there, okay? So this is your entry level to industry standards. You're going to learn air mover formula. You're going to learn the dehumidifier formula. Remember, one is a standard. The air mover is a standard. The other one is from the reference guide for dehumidifiers, okay? Very important to keep that in mind. You'll get a lot more details of it through this session, but we use industry standards to help give some third-party opinion to when we set up a job. Some insurance companies believe there's an inherent conflict of interest with a person, putting equipment on a job and you bill per piece of equipment. All right, if you think about it, like if I get the bill per piece of equipment and I'm slow, I could probably just put more equipment on every job. The answer shouldn't be, how much equipment did you put on the job? Everything was in the truck. And that's because that's all the power the house had, right? There should be some sort of thought process, okay? I think we can all agree on that. We might not all agree on these formulas, but we do have to remember the industry standard for air movers means it's in the blue pages. It is part of the standard, okay? Which means it's not a law. But if you tell people you're following industry standards, then you should follow that. The dehumidifier guideline is in the reference guide. So technically it's not part of an industry standard. It's a reference in the document. Pay attention to words like should and shall in this video. They're very important. And let's learn what the industry standards say about equipment sizing. Then we'll come back and give some practical guidelines on how we do it in our company, right? And easier ways to set that up in the field.